Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker and I am joined by Becc Holland. Becc, what is up?
Nothing much, Scott. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. Very happy to have you back. I think your last Sales Hacker webinar that we did, Personalization at Scale, I don't want to say it broke the internet, but YouTube gave us some calls and like, this is too much. It's pretty insane how many views that B2B sales webinar has. Pretty wild.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about that webinar is, if I remember correctly, there was like a hurricane alarm in the middle of it. And I'm like, great. So the most viewed piece of content here all know where I live and what alarms go off and when.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So as people are kind of trickling in, we had like over 1,500 people register for this. So this is going to be a really cool discussion. And what we're talking about is 7 sequences most organizations aren't operationalizing, but should be. And this does build on the one that we did last time. So I want to make sure that I make that clear. There is a full webinar that Becc and I did on personalization at scale, which we'll cover briefly at the beginning, but I would highly recommend going and watching that one. But really quickly, just a few housekeeping items. Number one, these are all recorded. So if you got to jump off or whatever it is, don't worry, we'll send this to you within about 24 hours, and then it'll actually live on our Sales Hacker YouTube channel as well. Number two is, if you've ever joined a Sales Hacker webinar, hopefully you know that we don't just do these to sit around and talk to each other. We make these for the community. They are very much for you to get better at your profession. So we want you to be in the driver's seat as much as possible. So we've got some slides, we've got some content that we're going to be running through. Becc will be driving. I'm just trying to stay out of the way. But if you have any relevant questions throughout, please jump on the Q&A section down at the bottom. Would love to hear from you, even right now. Your name, your title, where you're from. It always makes it much more fun for us when we know that we're not just speaking to an empty room. But all right, Becc, let's dive into it. So I don't want to spend too much time on your bio, although you've had a super impressive career to date.
Thank you.
Built sales development programs at Gong, G2, now Chorus, and before that, we're an account executive. I guess I'll let you kind of do a quick background on what you want to share of your bio.
Yeah, I actually have a slide, so I'm glad that you didn't go too long.
Perfect.
If anyone wants to know a really great picture of me, it's sitting right there in the chat. Hi, everyone. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the head of sales development at chorus.ai. And I'll spend like 15 seconds on my background. Basically I graduated from school and then I came into the world as an account executive, was an account executive for 6 years at several different firms, and then transitioned into tech. So I decided to take a step back to be an SDR, and I have kind of played in the SaaS world mostly since I've been an SDR. But, I think at the beginning, there was a lot of things that I was running into as an SDR that really surprised me. Why most people weren't personalizing messaging, why, we were focusing our entire value prop on us, why all the things that made me fall in love with sales from an account executive perspective were kind of just discouraged, I guess, in the SDR world. So I started a little bit of a journey, and I love that you brought it up, Scott, of the Personalization at Scale webinars. So full disclosure to everyone on the line, this is a response webinar more so than anything of, we went through the personalization at scale and how to personalize emails at scale and the infrastructure and what to say and how to trigger the right things in your buyer's brain that makes them want to respond to you by taking a meeting. But that's a full length. I think it's an hour and 45 minutes. So I would encourage everyone, there's a really deep background in how to personalize your messaging at scale. But when it comes down to the response, I got a lot of response messages that said like, hey, Becc, really love the idea of personalization. How are you structuring that within your sales engagement platform? So Today I use outreach, and that's who we're using over here at Chorus. So I wanted to focus in on here and how we niche into the sales engagement. But I think from a structural perspective, both are very, very important. So I think about 50% of the problem with SDR teams and SDR individual contributors that aren't hitting quota, about 50% of the onus lies on, the individual contributor of like, from the tactical perspective, what am I saying to this person? What kind of cold calls am I having, et cetera. And then the other 50% of the onus, from my perspective, lies on leadership of how can we structure the kinds of leads and the types of premises that we're surfacing to our team, to help them deploy it. So as far as an agenda today, I wanted to zero in on 4 different pieces. So everyone's going to have to stay tuned. The 7 sequences are last, but I think it wouldn't make much sense without the background. The first item, I'm going to do a crash course on personalization of my last webinar, and hopefully sum it up in about 10 or 15 minutes, but again, watch the extended session. The second piece I'm going to cover is how to build a shell sequence. So basically, how can I intertwine this personalized messaging into a sequence that's repeatable, and it gives me the desired outcome in a repeatable fashion, because that's half of the battle too. The third piece, I want to zero in on 3 common sequences that I see people commonly deploy, and how to put a fresh take to them. Including this personalization intertwined into the common sequences that I see. And then the 7 sequences that most people aren't operationalizing. I said nobody is, and that was kind of a bold claim. Maybe I should have taken that back. So I'm not going to say no one on the line is. But
let's hope someone is. Let's hope. We hope that someone is using these 7.
So, yeah,
I love it.
Go ahead.
So super quickly, before we dive into it, and I hand the reins fully over, I want to just quickly, let's do a poll. I think it's super important to understand like how many individual contributors we have, how many managers, and then director level and above. It's always super interesting and helpful. Just helps us kind of frame the conversation and know exactly where to focus. I'm assuming we're going to have a lot of I think probably both individual contributors who are looking to up their game, and then people that are looking to make kind of systemic changes to their SD function.
Yeah.
All right, we'll stop that in 3, 2, 1. Let's see. Cool.
Okay, individual contributor looks like the winner.
Yeah, heavy individual contributor, 58% individual contributors, 22% coming from managers, director level and above 20. So almost a direct split between, people that are managing people and then people that are actually in role.
How quick are these polls to build? I would be interested, how many out of those individual contributors, which looks like we're at 58%, how many of you that are individual contributors are building your own sequences, and how many are letting your management do it for you?
That's awesome. And we'll get Alex. Alex, if you can build that one and let me know when it's ready, we'll do that one in a little bit.
Okay, cool. That helps give me an overview. But when it comes to the sequences, why don't we zero in for 15 minutes? This is just going to be a summary crash course of the Personalization at Scale webinar, just to give those who are on the line for the first time kind of a background. So a little bit of context to why personalization, I think, is really important to answer first. I had noticed whenever I was an account executive and then I transitioned to be an SDR, that I was encouraged to do templates, buyer persona templates at best, or maybe, event templates based on them going to an event. And I just got to the point where it wasn't working for me anymore. And so I've done this session, a few times live, and usually I ask the 2 questions, and I would ask, the viewers on the line the same 2 questions that I asked myself whenever I embarked on this journey. The first is, do you respond to unpersonalized mass blast messaging? And then the second question, for me, that answer was no. And resoundingly from leaders I've talked to across the board, the answer is also no. And then the second question, the hard question that changed my career forever, is I asked myself, do I think my prospects are different than me in that regard? So that kind of started the conviction realm of, okay, I don't think that my prospects are different than me in that regard. So I knew I had to personalize, but I had to build out how. So the two biggest things that the arguments against personalization, number one is a volume of, I can't get out a super high volume of, I need to scale this thing. And so I need to make sure that I'm getting out enough emails and cold calls intertwining this personalization. And then the other argument that I've heard against it is you can't control what your reps are saying. So those were the two problems I embarked to solve with this personalization. So I leverage outreach to do it.
Awesome. And quickly, my man, Alex Williford, shout out Alex. He built our poll just like that, like a wizard.
Awesome.
So let's launch it. And it's, who builds your sales sequences? Answer, I build my own sequences, or two, management builds my sequences for me. If you're in management, obviously management builds my sequences for me.
Yeah.
This will be, what's your take? I actually don't know where the market sits these days.
I would guess from individual contributors that way more individual contributors are building their own sequences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe management hands them some, but they think that they don't hit the pain point hard enough. And so they try out their own stuff.
Yeah. So maybe they get like a template and they're like, oh, okay, management for sure. And then build their own.
Totally. So like, I know there's even a feature in outreach where you can lock them out from doing it because, you know, most ICs want to, you know, become a human on the line and say something different.
Yeah. Okay. Let's stop that in 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You're right. It looks like you talk to SD orgs all the time, which you do. I build my own sequences. 67% of the audience today build their own sequences, and then only 33% has management build it for them.
Yeah, and that's including managers who answered, managers build it for me. So, okay, cool. So that actually is really helpful for context. So without further ado, why don't we kick into the crash course on personalization, how you can personalize messaging within a sequence. So to do this is going to be super high level. Again, watch the webinar, but the 5 buckets that I bifurcated everything out to was, there's 5 types of premise buckets that you can choose whenever you are reaching out to someone. And I'm always open to people to add to this and challenge this. These were the 5 buckets. I got out a big sheet of paper and a purple marker, and I basically listed out every single reason that I thought that you could personalize on. And I developed some theories around which ones would have higher trigger rates with my prospects. So they are listed in descending response rate. So the first bucket is the most likely to get a response, and then we'll go down to the 5th bucket, which is the least likely to get a response. So this is within the email itself, what to focus on. The first bucket is self-authored content, anything that your prospect, a webinar they were part of, an article that they wrote, or a post that they made. So basically the principle on this is some kind of content that they authored themselves, that they were a part of creating. So, you know, my theory was, I think that will trigger a higher likelihood of response rate because the prospect actually authored it. The second bucket is engaged content. It's any kind of content your prospect liked, shared, or commented on, but didn't author themselves. So the difference there is who is authoring it and who is not authoring it. So engaged content is anything on LinkedIn that you see them. Full disclosure is kind of an asterisk. I'm sourcing most of this through LinkedIn premises of like, these are psychographic principles that have to deal with the end user themselves, not just their company, not just their vertical or buyer persona, but some kind of activity that they actually did. So second bucket is engaged content, anything they liked, shared, or commented on. Third bucket is self-attributed traits, anything in their profile line, headline, and company line. So this is something that they wrote about themselves, usually, of like, you know, mine, for instance, says a homegrown Texan who innately believes that hiring the right people is just as important as developing them. So this is anything that they wrote about themselves that you can, that signals to you what they, you know, what they really are passionate about and what they really focus on when it comes to the role. I have the kind of as another asterisk, I have the rule that whatever premise you pick, you have to focus on in the second line of the email, hooking that to what your value prop is of like second line of the email. So I discourage people from doing a 10-80-10 rule, which is like, I notice that you're Canadian, Scott. We over here at Chorus help drive quota attainment. Give me some time to do that. If you want to make sure that whatever premise line that you're picking, that you're constantly thinking about what kind of premise can hook to what my product does. So, a great example is I saw an email today that one of my reps actually wanted to review, where the person had written an article on the importance of intuition and insights both, and how most people are relying on intuition. So they said, I really enjoyed this article. One line that stood out to me was X. And then the value prop was, what if you could get your sales reps to rely less on subjective intuition and more on objective insights about how their cold calls are going, so they can drive more quota attainment and close more deals as a result. So yeah, so it's got to be hooked.
Yeah. Quick question here, Beck. We're getting some pushback already from Michael Klein. Always love a good, healthy pushback. Michael says, how much time per lead are you recommending doing all this research before reaching out? It seems like you can spend too much time doing research and not enough time picking up the phone.
I agree that people can spend too much time doing it. So we'll get to it a little bit later. I love the question, Michael. We'll get to it a little bit later, but short answer, my SDRs are sending out on average 30 emails and making 60 cold calls per day on all personalized messaging. So industry standard, Trish Bertuzzi Bridge Group cut a report on the average amount of cold calls an SDR makes or self-prospector makes. And on average, you are making 47 to 52 dials per day. So I knew that was the marker of what scale is for the industry. So I knew that however I was scaling it, that I needed to hit that marker in terms of volume. Otherwise, no one would deploy it. So a general rule of thumb, my first, and we'll get into a little bit later, but my first step of my sequence is that they are viewing the LinkedIn profile. They're hunting 4 to 5 premises in under 5 minutes. That fuels the rest of the sequence for them, which is a 16-step sequence. So not much time, and it also makes sure that they're spending the time on the right people, because if I'm going to be spending 5 minutes to source these premises, then I'm going to be a little bit more choosy on who I'm talking to. That's a great question. The last 2 buckets, and I want to make sure we're okay on time here, but the last 2 buckets is junk drawer. So this is any kind of school they attended, personal interest or hobby, basically anything non-business about them. Of like, hi, Scott, I noticed that you like pizza. I noticed that you are a connoisseur of wine. I noticed that you just went hiking in Brazil, or was it Brazil, Latin America, somewhere in there?
Amazon, close enough.
Amazon, yeah. So any junk drawer premise is something about them that's personalized, but remember, the rule of thumb is that you have to link it back to what your business does. So if I'm, picking Scott's love for, wine, let's say it's, the value prop over here at Chorus could be did I get a thumbs up?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I could say, hi, Scott, reason for my outreach is I notice that you're a connoisseur of wine. When it comes to wine, good wine, it's all about highlighting the best flavors. What if you could highlight the best flavors of your sales conversations over at outreach and drive more booked meetings and quota attainment as a result? Give me a shot to, Wednesday at 2 to unpack that. So basically, whatever premise I pick, I can't bring up Scott's love for wine and then pivot to what Chorus does without any kind of relation in there.
Totally.
The 5th bucket, and this is the least likely trigger bucket, is company. So this is M&A, posts, blogs, hiring, website language. It's firmographic only, but my encouragement is to be the more detailed, but the more brief, the better. So those sound like, it sounds like an oxymoron, but because SDRs have been trying to send out multiple messages to the same person and make it look like it's personalized when it's not, you get a lot of messages like, hey, Scott, I noticed that your company is growing. Hey, Scott, my CEO sent me your profile, of like these mass blasts that they look like personalization. And so people they're smart, so they can smell out whether that's, a real personalized email or not. So if you're going to go the growth route, then I would say the difference between, Hi, Scott, I notice your company is growing. And hi, Scott, I notice that your company grew 63% in the last 6 months and you just added a new CRO over at Outreach, is the difference between your buyer thinking that you know them and you don't know them. So if you're going to go company, that's the least likely trigger bucket, but that's how I would accomplish it. Then the last two buckets of scenarios, let's call them. Premises are for the personalized message itself. Postbound premises are for more scenarios, and we'll build sequences on them later. But basically what a postbound premise is it's not truly inbound and it's not truly outbound. So a lot of SDRs, I'm sure, will be giving me an amen at this point, but you know, an inbound to me is a demo request. It's a hand raiser, someone asking to see your platform, and your job as an SDR is to, you know, gut that fish and qualify the fish and make sure that there's someone that, you know, you guys, whatever that level is, you know, that you see as qualified. An outbound fish is someone who's very, very targeted, I hope, and it's someone kind of out in the wild that basically they don't know about your company, and you're seeking them out to educate them maybe on what your category does or what you do as a company and trying to book some time. So that's the hardest to book, in my opinion. So postbound is basically everything in between. So, I mean, we'll get into a lot of examples like content downloads or webinar registrants, like everyone on the webinar today, or, you know, someone who attended an event. But there's going to be two types of postbound premises we're going to use in our scenarios. One that you should mention what the premise of the message is in the scenario for context, and some that you shouldn't mention, and you should just rely on normal outbound personalization premise. So what that looks like in terms of execution, and again, this is just super high level, I want to make sure everyone knows that, is if you do not have a postbound premise that you can mention or one at all, I would give a bucket premise summary and a transition with the line, one line in specific, and give your prospect a bucket premise excerpt. So what that would look like is I would say, you know, hi, Scott, reason for my outreach is I noticed that you wrote this article the other day, or you wrote this post the other day on being in the Amazon about how life's too short. One line that stood out to me was X. You know, so you really, if you don't, in either case scenario, you want to have two pieces to really nail the point home. You either want to have a summary of a bucket premise in the first 5 buckets that I mentioned and an excerpt, or if you have a postbound premise, you know, for example, they attended this webinar today. You could say, hi, Scott, I noticed you attended the webinar on 7 sequences that most orgs aren't operationalizing but should. But more importantly, I saw that you wrote this article, you know, on living life to its fullest in the Amazon. So why don't I pause there? Are there any questions so far? It looks like the line is going up a little bit.
There's lots of questions.
Okay.
And I love this one. I think postbound is so important to talk about because, you know, I remember back in the day, we'd get like a bunch of ebook leads and you'd just be like, hey, thanks so much for downloading the ebook. And like, that's all that you would reference and you think your job's done. Cause like, that's personal. That's what they did. And you're saying that you can't hang your hat on that. That's not good enough. You got to also bring in this second kind of bucket premise if you're going to have any help.
Yeah, because one thing that I noticed, and this wasn't in my orgs, you know, I went from Adjust to Gong to G2 Crowd to Chorus, and in all of those orgs and all the orgs I've ever done any kind of like, you know, 1-hour session with, all of them would tell you that they will send out a mass blast messaging that like, hey, I noticed you downloaded the ebook. It worked 5 years ago, maybe a little bit, but it's just not working anymore. And so I'm not here to set the rules for anyone's engagement. I am, however, if people are not seeing the results that they want from an ebook download, I'm here to integrate a little bit of personalization to bump those trigger rates, you know, north, because these are a lot of times really valuable prospects that are downloading our content. So it's the right person. It's just the wrong hook.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, kind of in summary here, if you don't have a postbound premise and you use a bucket summary, premise summary, and a bucket premise excerpt, one line that stood out to you or one line in specific that resonated, et cetera, et cetera. But if you do have a postbound premise, it's about your company of like, hey, Scott, I noticed that you attended Unleash Summit Series, you know, in San Francisco. More importantly, I saw you wrote this article. I saw you made this post of like, yeah, let's talk about outreach, or let's talk about chorus, but more importantly, I saw you did this thing and it really made me think, like you want to communicate to your buyer that there's a dang good reason that you think that they could find value from you.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And quickly before we go on. So Alex Moffitt has a question. Can you give me another example of the premise pairing? Alex, I would recommend you go watch Personalization at Scale. We did a full webinar on this that really breaks it down. That'll be your best bet. And then last question, Angus Fraser. I like this question. He's thinking in the future already. Director of Enterprise Accounts at Page Freezer. Hi, Beck and Scott. Any suggestions on how best to approach the actual content scraping for the 5 premise buckets? For example,
that's a great question.
Right? Are there any apps that you can use that scrape the internet to grab all the materials published by X?
Yeah. So there are a couple platforms that will claim to do personalization, but what they'll give you, Angus was his name, right?
Angus, yeah.
What they'll give you is a ton of content, but you don't know which one of those pieces are that you can hook.
Right.
So as far as a total list of content that they're doing, there is a feature in LinkedIn Sales Navigator that you can query who you're connected to roll and to who has published content within the last 30 days. So that's kind of a quick, it's like low hanging fruit in there of like, you can just scan through and see what articles. But yeah, so that's the best way to do it that I've seen. There are a couple platforms that again will say like, hey, we do personalization at scale. But what I've seen them do is like, hi Beck, I noticed that you're in San Francisco. Like, how's the Golden Gate Bridge doing? I'm like, it's fine. Like, why are you in my inbox? Yeah, it's doing great. I built it myself, and so those platforms to me, it's like, it's all in that middle hook line. And I go into it more in that personalization. I hate to keep mentioning it, but great question. I would go, more into that session, but LinkedIn Sales Navigator is a short answer. Yeah. You can build it into outreach, all of these personalization hooks into custom fields. So you'll see a couple of them here. But basically, if you go to if you're using outreach, I've done it before with InsideSales.com. Those are the 2 vendors that I've tangoed with, but outreach it's super easy. Actually, a guy asked me, he'd watched the content, asked me to do it the other day for him. It took me 8 minutes total to build in all these fields. So it's really, really short. And then the great thing about it is, so to answer that question about how long it takes, the first step of my sequence, and we'll go into it more later, what the later steps look like, is you need to hunt 3 premises. So you'll see like on this page, self-authored webinar title and self-authored webinar excerpt of like, hi Beck, I noticed that reason for my outreach is I really enjoyed your 7 sequences that most orgs aren't deploying. One line that really stood out to me was be aggressive about knowing your buyer. If you're going to be aggressive about something, be aggressive about knowing your buyer. You can click save. And then the great thing about it is every single time that you call that person, because we know they don't trigger on the first call, it's like call 8, 9, 10, 14, whatever, 20. I don't have to do the research every single time. So one premise that I picked out for you, Scott, is, hi Scott, the reason for my outreach is I couldn't get enough of your LinkedIn post the other day on seeing is believing. One line that stood out to me was, but the key is that I had to see it first. So I click save, and now every single time that I call Scott, you'll see over here in the view that it will surface this information of what are the premises that I'm going to use.
Nice. I want to quickly hammer that home one more time, just to make sure everyone, so this is taking that layer of personalization one layer deeper. Like always go, can I go one more deeper? Because if you had just reached out and be like, hey, I saw your LinkedIn post, it's like, man, a lot of people saw that LinkedIn post or whatever, right? And it's like, so what about you as a person did you like about that post? What stood out to you? And then I have this like actual connection with you as the person. It's a small difference, but it's a very important one.
Oh, I completely agree. And the results from this has been uncanny. I mean, when I was at 2 orgs ago at 4x me, G2 at 3x me, over here at Chorus, I came on in a month, we 6x'd. 6x'd our best month as an org before I had showed up in 1 month, with 80% of my reps were in ramp. And when I mean ramp, I mean like month 1 ramp and like never been in SaaS before.
Wow.
So it's
That's
like,
insane.
of like, hey, we need to learn. The answer is we have to personalize. You know, the question is how do we put that infrastructure around it and make it easier and more quick, like put a science to it all so that my reps can be repeatable about doing it.
Yeah.
So now let's go in. So now that's the crash course on personalization. Again, there's a lot more to that conversation of what the rest of the email should look like, how to CTA, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But why don't we transition into how can I build a shell, what I call a shell sequence. So it reminds me of the time and what channel that I need to approach my prospects with. So it's repeatable, but I also leaves the content somewhat up to my SDRs in terms of personalizing. So the first shell sequence that I built is, and you'll see the tag up here, I put it number 10 because it is actually cold outreach is the lowest sequence for me in terms of sequences that I'm running, because I'm leveraging those postbound triggers so much, so heavily. But we certainly leverage this quite a bit if people aren't, you know, within our ABM accounts or not, you know, aren't leveraging our content or being a part of any of our webinars. But basically, high level, this sequence is a shell sequence where you want to, again, pick a bucket premise summary. You want to sum it up. Hey, I loved your profile line on developing people. The part that really stood out to me is hiring the right people is just as important as developing them. So you give them a summary and one line in specific. The sequence itself, and we're going to really zero in and be outreach product heavy, full disclosure here today, but is 16 steps over 21 days. And it's more aggressive on the back end than it is the front end. The back end, the reason for that, I actually took a piece out of MJ Hoffman, author of Why You Now, his playbook. But in the beginning, he irons out the methodology of if you're heavier up front with your sequencing, and then you're slower in the back end, you basically are super aggressive when you first meet someone and you're just hammering them with messaging. And then when you peter out over time, you're teaching your prospect that if they just wait long enough, then you're going to go away entirely. So he suggested, and I tried it, and my results were pretty uncanny, flipping the order of those two of I'm going to be lighter on the front end. So I have this really quality content and I'm kind of almost nurturing you up front. And then near the end of the sequence, I'm going to be much more heavy so that they think like, oh my gosh, okay, I know who this person is, and they will not go away unless I talk back to them. So, so that's basically the philosophy of how to build this sequence. But how you can build the sequence within the templates themselves is basically, and you'll see here in the template, is I basically just say customize subject line of like, I'm going to remind you that what kind of action to do, but I'm not going to tell you what the subject title is. So it's like, hey, Scott, you need to email this person. The only thing that I directly tag in a cold outreach sequence is their first name as a dynamic tag. I remind my SDRs in the middle of like the 7 pillars and 7 deadly sins. Again, go watch the session, but it basically reminds them of here are the 7 types of flavors you need to stick to in this messaging. And you know the 7 deadly sins of things that you need to never say in messaging. But basically it just gives them the reminder of this is the type of action, and it's going to dynamic tag the first name, but then it's going to leave the content up to you.
I love it. I love how you build like, they're more like wireframes than templates,
Yeah.
Right? You're not telling people what to write. You're almost telling them how to think about what they're writing, which is interesting. Yeah.
I mean, and it's so funny because people are like, you have to send out a script. I'm like, we all know scripts aren't working anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I want to hire really, really smart people that can challenge me and can show me the technique, like new improvements, you know, on these techniques. So I'm very heavy on technique, but my SDRs are coming up with a lot of these things of like, I teach the technique of fall on your sword, but that can look 100 different ways. And so the interesting thing when I'm polling, one of my industry favorites, absolute favorites, and I know you know him, Scott, is Josh Braun.
Yeah, he's awesome.
And when we're on the phone, I'll be like, here's the technique. And he'll say something back to me. And I'm like, oh, that's a totally different saying, like way to say that. But it sounds so clean. So it's like we go back and forth on teaching each other technique. And then we both give each other like a different spin on the technique that we taught each other on. So it's a really cool way to build, is like, I'm not the genesis of all the wonderful ideas in the world. I'm just going to try and put an infrastructure in here, and then you tell me what you want to say, because you're smart. As far as the sequence itself, I wanted to get into the nitty gritty and basically just, I mean, this is my playbook. Everyone on the line, I'm not sure why I'm doing I do know why I'm doing it. I want to help this community grow.
Yeah.
I want this community to be the community that I know it can be. And so I'm going to roll out, this is not some version of what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing that 6x our numbers overnight with most reps in ramp. The first, on day one, I mean, you can read it, but basically how I think of the infrastructure of the cold sequence itself is, I think of it in pods. So you'll see day one, day one, day one, day two are the first 4 steps. And you're going to start with that LinkedIn, I think Michael was his name, but he asked of like when they're doing the research and how much time it's taking. Here is when they're doing a 5-minute profile view, they're hunting 4 to 5 premises, and they're storing them in Outreach. So then research is done. They just need to be, responsible for crafting the message. Day one, I also have them send a cold email with the infrastructure I just showed you. And again, watch Personalization at Scale for what the text of that email is. And then I have them make a cold call on day one and a cold call on day 2. These are business days, and they leave a voicemail here. I'm even going to tell you when they leave their voicemails. And I'm going to do a session.
There's no voicemails on the rest.
No, there's one on day 15, or sequence step number 15, day 21. There are breakup voicemails. So we can't, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into the structure of that voicemail, but I'm doing a session. It should be on Flip the Script, which is a series I have on Chorus, of what even the infrastructure of the voicemail looks like. But day one, day 2, it's like LinkedIn, to fuel the rest of the sequence, cold email that's personalized, cold call, and cold call with voicemail on day 2. So that's the first pod, if you will. The second pod is day 8, day 9, and this is a reply email. And I actually took a playbook out of Outreach's Agogi sequence. I know you guys are big on the Agogi sequence on the any thoughts. It honestly, I'm like, I'm not sending that. I cannot reply with just any thoughts. So I wanted to rub off on one another. So I basically said, I say any thoughts, and it's a reply to the original email. And then I connect content on there of PS, given your team size, I thought you might like this session on, and I attach the deck, and I attach, maybe personalization at scale as part of the step of, it's kind of a marry of like, okay, let's still add some value in here, but the response rates on that any thoughts is actually it's way higher than I thought it was going to be. So kudos to Outreach for kind of giving me that snippet. So day 8 is a cold email, and you'll notice the infrastructure pretty much stays the same here in these pods of like cold call or cold email, cold call, cold call. My third pod starts on day 13. It's day 13. It's cold email. That's not a reply. It's a second personalized premise, and it's a cold call. So it's, email, call that day, call the next day. Now we're heating up. I want you guys to take notice of the delta between these pods. So it's like day 1 and 2 to day 8, that's 6. Day 9 to day 13, that's 4. Day 14 to day 18, that's 4. And then it's 18, 18, 19, 20, 21 breakup email. So it's like, I'm going to help them get to know me by who I am in this beginning section. So they're convinced. I mean, we do know our buyer at this point of like, you wrote this article. I know you by face. I know you by name, and near the end, it's like, that's where we're really hammering them. So, I'd been asked a lot, like, what is the definition? I think a big question for people, especially SDRs, what is the difference between spam and persistence? And to me, the difference between those two is how much you are researching your buyer. Mm-hmm. So it's like my buyers, when I'm super aggressive with them, or like, I'm sending them a lot of messaging, I notice that we very, very rarely get hung up on, because we're triggering of like, wait, before you go anywhere, I know something about you,
Yeah.
And it's like this diffusing property, but like, you know, I think a lot of reps, because they don't want to be that pushy, aggressive rep, but they also know that they have a quota to hit. And so it's like, where is this line here? So I think you know, from my perspective, the definition between, or the difference between spam and persistence is the amount that you have researched your buyer and know your buyer, and are convicted, you know, that you could help them.
I agree. I used to say to my reps that it was, you're spamming someone if they give you a shot right now, let's say magically they like saw an email and they were just like, hey, tell me what you got. If you could add value to them right away, then you're not spamming them, right? Because you're asking for time and you're delivering on the promise versus just being like, oh, I don't know, do you want to get...
Yeah. And it's like, if you have that really vague, ambiguous, like, I don't know, I'm here because I want to sell you stuff, then it's like, okay, I get the hang up, whatever. And it is uncanny. I mean, I kid you not when I say one of my reps came up to me and he was brand new to SaaS and he was like, something so weird happened the other day. I'm like, walk me through it. Like, tell me more. And he's like, someone hung up on me. And I'm like, oh, you don't know that that's normal.
Yeah.
I was like,
literally,
bless your heart. His name is Chris. I was like, Chris, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Sorry for not setting the right expectations.
Yeah. He was just so confused, which is just such a great vibe. And it's like, I don't think that we're special. Like, I hope none of my team is listening to this. I don't think that we're that special. You know, it's like, this isn't an us thing. This is an infrastructure thing. And this is a methodology thing. So I would challenge, you know, anyone listening to this of like, you know, you deploy this and the responses, I kid you not, I get maybe 100 messages on LinkedIn a day of people deploying it and 2xing because of it. And it's like, and they're like, thank you. And I'm like, no, thank you. I'm like, thank you for sending this back to me. So I don't think that the bar here, you know, for the industry is super high on like, you know, I'll say, hey, can you send me the message that you personalize with? And I'll get it. And I'm like, ooh, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is actually like a 3. But you personalize, so people are, you know, the responses, people are ready to validate you with the response if you know who they are. Totally. So this structure is here, 18, 18, day 18, I'm going to do a follow-up session, but basically I do what's called fall on your sword light, where I take accountability for the outreach not working so far. You know, I say something like, you know, the reason for my outreach is I was reading an article the other day about being relevant to my buyer, and I was convicted about the message I sent you. Being conversation intelligence, we should know better. That has the bold claim of making reps better. We should know better. You know, with your permission, I'd like to earn some, you know, another shot to earn some of your time. And then they go into a personalized message. So I know that's kind of a quick recap, but cold call with voicemail, and then a breakup email. And so I don't think we have time to get into the infrastructure of that. Let's keep moving. But I'm going to do another follow-up session. I actually just recorded it. So I'll unflip the script of what the actual text of those emails look like.
Sweet.
Then we have the other personalized sequence that we have is postbound premises. So I know that we had made the difference of, if you don't have a postbound premise, then you do outbound summary and outline, outbound premise bucket summary excerpt. If you do have a postbound premise, then you do mention the postbound premise. I noticed you attended this webinar, but more importantly, and then you go into a personalized message. So how I hook that into my sequences, and you can see them live here, but basically it's the same level of outreach, like types of outreach, medium of outreach, but you'll see I dictate the title here. I say and they personalize here, your article on LinkedIn and downloading blank. So the only difference between these two is in the actual text of the email, instead of just saying hi, first name, and leaving it blank with 7 pillars and 7 deadly sins to remind them, I put hi, first name, and then I say reason for my outreach is I noticed you just downloaded, and I custom tag it so that every time we upload a campaign into Marketo or Salesforce, then it like automatically fills into that. And then it says, but more importantly, and then it's blank, and I let them fill in the outbound premise from there.
Quickly, Beck, I'm going to sneak in a question because we have 10 million, but we have so much to get through. But this is a good one. Bobby Outson. Bobby, thanks for the question. If a prospect is not on LinkedIn, what's the first place we should go for research?
Great question. I just recorded a session on it. I hate to tease you here. I just want to make sure we get through the content. It's a great question. There are 5 different buckets that you can go into. I hate to leave you on a teaser. I think in 3 weeks, we're going to splice it out. So we splice out a video every single week. And I just recorded that because that's a really commonly asked question. But,
cool.
Yeah, short answer, I would say I'll lead with, I don't want to give you no value. So junk drawer premise is a great one to use, of like, even if they're not on LinkedIn, this is usually highly technical buyer that I see, HR, tech, finance. Like if you're selling into DevOps, backend, like it's usually not super LinkedIn heavy buyer. Their capital is being mysterious. Yeah. So one thing you could use is junk drawer, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all fair game as long as you hook it back to what your product does. In my experience, they're not mad.
Sweet.
But great question. So Postbound sequence, it's basically the same in terms of type and medium of the last slide. But the only difference is I hook in the actual piece of content. So if you'll notice here, I call them evergreen content downloads of when I'm uploading these campaigns. You guys, first of all, we're hiring. But I am circling around to where every single time we upload a campaign, if an SDR owns the account, then it's circled around to them automatically. So where we don't have to do any list cleaning or list, blah, blah, blah. I control the in what order and who and what medium of contact, and then they control the content based on principles. So it's a really quick way to list build. So, I think one of the best questions I was asked by a mentor of mine of like, okay, I'm an SDR, I walk in, what do I do? And I'm like, you know what? I have to iron that out for them with the kinds of sequences. I think determining the who and the what premise is most of the work that I wanted to iron out for them so that they can just, start typing. Okay, so the third piece is going to be a fresh take on 3 commonly used sequences. I've mentioned them before. Do you like the PH?
Yeah, I do. I love it. It's the best.
I'm still hip. Yeah. I'm still with it.
Some Fresh Prince of Bel-Air stuff.
Got no life, but I'm with it.
And quickly, you quickly went over something there. Becc Holland is hiring. I don't know if you've heard that, everyone attending. Becc Holland is hiring. Go beg, steal, borrow, whatever you got to do to get in front of Becc Holland to get on her team. It's an amazing opportunity to join.
Thank you for that plug. I've got 5 or 6 slots open in Boston by the end of the year. So, I'm ready. So the 3 commonly used sequences that I see people deployed, number 1, I want a drum roll. Scott, can you take a guess at one?
Commonly used sequences
that I've mentioned so far.
Well, they've got to be like, I don't know, content downloads has to be
Bingo! Winner! Boom. Chicken dinner. The first one is evergreen content downloads. Usually I see people dictating what you mentioned, Scott, as they say, hey, you downloaded this piece of content, so you want a meeting? It's like the prospect gets mad because they just want to download your content in peace.
Yeah.
So it's like
something totally opposite. You bought a banana, so do you want this car now?
Yeah. So
like completely different.
And the bizarre thing is, if your prospect is on a webinar, downloaded some of your content, they know who you are. Mm-hmm. So like, you better be ready on objection handling for this team is very, very, very heavy because if they know who you are and they download your content, if they value enough to download your content, then there's probably a reason that they haven't requested a demo, because there's usually a big fat button that says request a demo in the middle of your webinar. Not on this one, but on a lot of them of like, they know who you are. So again, the infrastructure is you want to bring it up for context, transition with, but more importantly, and then go to an outbound premise summary. So the first one is evergreen content downloads. The infrastructure is the same as we mentioned. You want to go 2 for 2? There's 3 of them in total. So I want you to guess the second
I'm going to go just straight persona based. So you're just like, hey, because you're a VP of sales, I'm going to reach out to you.
That one is usually, we wrap up persona-based and personalization. The second one is what we're on right now, webinar attendees.
Yeah.
So like everyone, should get some kind of, webinar follow-up of like, we want to be very, very open about, some of our struggles over here at Chorus, but also the way that we're deploying things. Cause I want to hold the reps over here to a higher, bar of like, hey, you know, if you're going to reach out to anyone on a webinar, then you better have some kind of premise, you know, caricature drawn up for them. So second, evergreen webinar attendees. So the different spin on it is, instead of just mentioning the webinar, I would suggest transitioning again, but more importantly, and then transitioning onto some kind of premise about them. You know, make it about them. There's actually physical dopamine being released in your prospects' minds whenever you're talking about them or asking them about them. So I'd, you know, mention it for context and pivot. Third is event attendees. So those three are typically done pretty well, or I see people doing a lot of event follow-up. Hey, thanks for coming to our booth. Hey, you know, I didn't get a time to set up with you, you know, set up a demo in person. So I would suggest, again, just having the respect to be aggressive about who, like the amount of research that you're doing on your buyer and coupling that along with an outbound premise. Now we're into the juicy stuff. Okay, these are the 7 sequences. I got 8 minutes left. I'm probably going to go a little over. We have 7 sequences that most people aren't operationalizing, but should be. Okay. These 3 are ones where I would not mention the why, and I would only go cold outbound bucket premise plus an excerpt. So let's unpack these. The first one is dark funnel leads through buyer intent. Forrester did a research study on how your prospects are buying. And basically the first 3 things that they look for whenever they're considering a solution are: number 1, peer-to-peer, meaning I call up Scott and ask him who he's using for data and how he likes them. Number 2 is industry experts. And number 3 is review sites. So a lot of buyers who are in the dark funnel, people are doing more research than ever before. Actually, the last variable, I think it was number 15 on that list, was a demo. So your prospects and you are doing more research than ever before you engage with a salesperson. So dark funnel leads are, they can be flushed in through 3 different ways. You know, I just came from G2. The buyer intent is really, really heavy. It's the main plug that we would sell. But basically your buyers, if they're doing research on G2 Crowd, then that company will be sent to you via an email and say like, hey, you know, Intel is researching you. So that's one. 6 Sense and Bombora are 2 other platforms that do it. I'm not really sure on the particulars of how they do it, but they can feed leads back to you on if they're doing research on you. Maybe it's on impressions, you know, back to you of what, of who is researching your company. So dark funnel leads is the highest buyer intent, because usually in my experience, this is someone who's in market. This is someone who's not telling you, but they're evaluating me and my competitors. And so I have, again, I don't have them mention this because I think it's a little bit too much. I have them rely on outbound premises only of like, hi, Scott, I noticed you wrote this article. One line that stood out to me. And the responses I get are, I was just researching you. Man, this is like the right place and the right time. And I'm like, totally.
Do you know when you have like Facebook up and you say something and then it gives you the ad? Like this is basically the B2B version of that.
100%. And the interesting thing is most companies, and I'm kind of working on a custom integration now, but most companies, they will just give you a ping of like Intel is researching you. And the difference between your reps operationalizing that of like, keep in mind, it was seven sequences. Not most orgs aren't like haven't ever thought about. It's that they aren't operationalizing. So the number one thing I would suggest before the custom integration is built is like, okay, you know, this company is researching me. I'm going to pull everyone from my CRM and I'm going to shoot it to the top sequence for my SDR, so that, you know, whenever they're typing in emails to someone who's already in market. So it's like when you're talking about triggering high cold outreach, it's like 4 things to consider. Is this the right company? Is this the right person? Is it the right timing? And is it the right messaging? So I'm controlling really the timing. Is this the right timing for a company by dark funnel? Second is company funding. Again, thought about a lot, not actually done. You go over to an AE crew and you ask what's important to them. They say like firmographic. You know, did a company just raise money is a huge one of whether they can buy my software or not. But when you come to SDR teams and you say, are you operationalizing company funding? The best case scenario, they're sending over messaging that's like, hey, notice you just raised money. Notice you just raised, you know, you just transitioned over into being a unicorn over at Outreach. Now that you have cash, do you want to buy my stuff? super abrasive. So again, I wouldn't mention the funding piece, but I would just be appropriate enough to know it and know that it makes my buyer have higher buyer intent because they have money, and then just be seeking outbound premises. So Crunchbase, DataFox, which I believe is fueled by Crunchbase data. So again, I'm working to build a custom integration where do this automatically within sales engagement. But for now, if you, Crunchbase can a la carte you, these are all the companies that just raised funding, in an evergreen way so that I can flex them into these top sequences for my SDRs. LinkedIn Sales Navigator is another one. These are not in order of trigger rate, by the way. These are just seven that you can do. Third one is website views. Lead feeder, Clearbit, super creepy. Again, this is probably the lowest sequence that I would use of like someone at the company is looking at the website. It doesn't mean that it's going to have a huge impact, but it's one that people aren't operationalizing on. The interesting thing is we're buying a lot of tech and then we aren't going so far as to actually get the outcome from that tech. So most of this is execution. So I'd say execution, execution, execution. That's why you go on LinkedIn and you say, if your answer, you read a lot, like if your answer to a problem is a tech stack, then that's not an answer because it's not. So, all of these are the ways of which I'm doing it, but actually, flooding these into the sequences for my SDRs in an evergreen real-time fashion is how I'm making their day way easier. So that they're just using all their cerebral calories on what kind of message to send and what kind of premise to pick. For postbound sequences, you can mention that they did. Number one is executive churn. Executive churn, this can be the biggest opportunity I heard the other day, and I totally agree with this, there's new value and there's new user and there's existing value and existing user. New value to a new user is cross-sell. New value to an existing user is resell. Existing value to a new user is renewal. Existing value to a new user is upsell, cross-sell, resell, and renewal are basically the 4 buckets that you're looking at. And so resell is existing value to a new user, and that is the bucket that needs to be ironed out by companies. So tech is at an all-time high of churn rates, of like people aren't staying there for long. And so you see a lot of people, they take their tech stack with them. So, the number one variable I would be thinking about is number one, if someone churns in an org that we have a relationship with, I hope you're multi-threaded, but if you're not, I saw your post about that the other day, Scott, couldn't agree more, but it's like, I hope you're multi-threaded in the deal, but if you're not, you need to be all about, from a customer success perspective, reselling to the new person in the chair. Mm-hmm. But to the org that they moved on to, of like, they really like Chorus, they went on to a new company. It's like, can I sell into that new company is where I'm using it from a business development perspective. Another sequence that I'm using within the executive churn bucket is if they just were placed at a company that is using my competitor, because this has a super high trigger rate, but because they didn't make the decision to select that competitor. So they're usually more open, in my experience, to evaluate the differences between me and that competitor because they didn't pull the trigger on making the decision. So it's like less of a hit. Common VCs is one I haven't seen operationalize. Again, AEs talk about it a lot, but it's not operationalized. So Crunchbase, you can do a la carte, like, if Emergence Capital is one of our common VCs, then it's like, okay, I want to think about all of the companies that have them in common so I can sell into them. You can either do this as a bundle, if like we do 10% off to common VC companies, or you can, from a strategic perspective or go-to-market perspective, you can dictate what the messaging or the offering looks like. But I would suggest any kind of common VCs, or someone who is an investor, for instance, Doug Landis is one of our investors. It's like Doug is connected with billions of people. Everyone knows and loves Doug. So it's like, can I scour through? And you'll hear VC people say this. Very, very few SDR teams actually go after it. but it's like, he's like, go through my network, you know, see who you know that you like to sell into, ping me with a ghostwritten note and we'll do it from there. So
Yeah.
common VCs is a big one. Another firmographic trigger is IPO. You can use user gems is another one for executive churn that I've heard you can use from a platform perspective. Firmographic trigger is IPO. And then the last one over here is going to be LinkedIn, LinkedIn engagement. So a great example, I do a lot of content on LinkedIn. This is the most manual, which is why I put it last. My SDRs, after I make a post and I say, anyone who wants to request the slides, you know, go ahead and ping me, like put slide me or slides, please. And my SDRs are scouring that list, making a compiled list onto another list, figuring out who the account owner is. They're round robining this, this duty. I mean, LinkedIn has made it pretty tough to actually monetize, but who the account owner is, are they within ICP, and are they a current client? If the answer is they're not a current client, they do hit our ICP, then they route it to the account owner. So those are the 7. I have a surprise lightning round though.
And really quickly, just, we are cognizant of the time.
Yeah.
I knew, Beck, we were going to go over. So understandably, if you got to jump off, we will send the recording. But if you can hang out, we probably have about, I would say, who knows, 15, 20 minutes of really juicy, meaty content left. Beck always overdoes the value, which is amazing. Let's keep it going.
Surprise lightning round. I wanted to do one that people mention, one that people shouldn't mention in the messaging, is email opens. I wouldn't mention that they open your email. You can trigger this within Outreach. If someone opens your email, you can have an immediate trigger that basically you call that person. So I don't mention that they opened my email. Usually I just start calling them. So they're like, oh my gosh, I just opened your email. So that's one step, or you can build a sequence around it. I've even done that to where if someone opens my email, we import them into a sequence that's 2 calls that day and 2 calls the next day. So like our prospects don't, you know, your prospects won't really stand a chance if you start deploying this level of granularity of like, they're gonna say something, you know. And then the other one that I use for mention for context, that you mentioned, I do mention in the email, is we have a sequence for demoed in the past. So I want people to be very, very careful about sequencing this with, there are several people who, you know, saw our platform, maybe they chose a competitor, or, you know, maybe something happened. So using Chorus, we understand like, what was the context here? And then someone who just didn't seem to want to buy, or ghosted us, or, you know, et cetera, then we include personalization as to reason of why they passed of like, you know, I noticed that you said that we didn't have this feature, so it didn't make sense. We actually have some product updates around that feature. You know, would you be willing to jump on a demo? So if you were confused on whether I have a life or not, the answer is no with surprise lightning round. If you were really confused on whether I have a life or not, double lightning round. So double lightning round, and this is the last piece, and then we can kick into Q&A. But the double lightning round is, even within content or webinar leads or event leads, one of the biggest things people don't want to be left doing is reaching out to these leads that maybe they downloaded my content, but they don't hit my ICP. So I redefined what ICP is. Instead of saying ICP, when I hear from marketing that like it hits ICP, they're usually talking about they engage with my content a lot and they're the right size company. What I had seen from that is a lot of interns from Oracle that were downloading my stuff. So I redefined ICP to mean ideal customer company and ideal customer title. And if you want to deploy this within your sequences for content, let's say I build the sequences in descending order of how lucrative they are to me as a buyer. It doesn't affect the premise, but I descend. So I have a beginner's motion in the middle of like, if you want to do just high and acceptable of like, you know, high ICT would be they're a vice president. High ICC would be, you know, they have a sales team of over 300. High ICT and acceptable ICC, you know, acceptable ICT and high ICC, and then acceptable and acceptable. So basically they hit the minimum bar, but they're not super lucrative. This is how I sequence them within content. I mean, it all sounds pretty complicated, but my SDRs got it within about a week. You know, of like, oh, I just marched down this order and the premise is already filled here with me. And I'm just, you know, sitting here and crafting out the message. So I know it looks pretty complex, but really the complexity is on the onus of the manager, not the SDR. Of like, you know, they asked me to enable them. A lot of people think training. It's like, instead of just tactical training you all day, I'm going to surface to you the right people in a repeatable fashion and the triggers for you so that all of the onus of that grunt work is on me. And if you really want to do something granular, I would suggest the right version, the for experts version, only for like an enterprise org of like, you have a lot of, operations resources, RevOps, leaders, marketing operations, but sequencing for depth, you can even do high, medium, and low, of like, let's say content downloads, and you define title. For us over here, a high title would be a vice president or CXO. Medium title would be a director, and a low title would be a manager, within sales enablement operations, sales operations, AEs and SDRs. For company, for us, a high company would be 300 sales reps over, 100 to 300 sales reps would be medium. And then low would be under 100 sales employees, but they still hit my minimum bar of how many we need to sell into. So that's it. In summary, I know that this is really complex, but I think we have the opportunity, especially for the managers out there. I love that you're on the line. And I think that we have a really great opportunity to really enable our reps to be doing something really special, and importing their personality back into outreach and becoming human on the line with their prospects again. So, I think how you really can achieve that is personalizing at scale and putting the infrastructure forward so that you enable them to be all the wonderful things that they can be. That's it.
Amen. Amen. I love it. That was amazing. Thank you so much for all the insight. And that's you're at the forefront of it, Becc. I'm telling you. I'm telling you.
Here
it's
it
very,
is.
very cool. It's very cool to see. And it's amazing. Even I'm so familiar with outreach, and then even learning more ways how to use sales engagement of it's cool. All right. We have a ton of questions. We'll try and get through as many as possible in the next little while. So hang out if you have time. If not, I completely understand. We'll try and get through as many as possible. Okay, number one. This is, do you think reps should spend 100% of their time having conversations? In a perfect world, would they be not dealing with any of this sales ops or sequence building?
I'd have to understand the question a little bit more, maybe the why behind it, which I know we don't have the option. Can you say the question again?
Do you think that reps should spend 100% of their time having conversations, not doing this sequence building and stuff like that?
I mean, ideally, yes. It's like, ideally, they would spend all time selling. That's why enablement teams were built. I've even seen a good marker of enablement teams, being time selling. How much of their time is actually not spent in the CRM and all of these things. So I think the companies that are aggressive about that, I want to be careful that I never promote products to do that. But I think within the relationship of personalized messaging, yes, of course. I think, the more time spent doing that, the better, with the appropriate hooks.
Totally. Agreed. Nothing to add there. This one we got a few times. This was just, you offhandedly said that there was a filter in Sales Nav that you could sort by recently posted. Can you go a little bit further into that? And how do we find that? What is it called? Something?
Yes, that is a great question. If you go to, I would just go to my LinkedIn Sales Navigator person and ask them how to do that. But basically, engage content. There is a view within Sales Navigator. That's a great point. Maybe I'd do it as a flip the script session of like, and we can tag people in it. But there is a filter that you can sequence down to, or you can navigate down to if they have posted any content within the last certain amount of days. But that's for premium users only. So yeah, I don't want to go too much in depth to it now, but yes, we can actually do it. We can do a session on that.
I love it. Okay, what exactly is a fall on the sword light? You went over that quickly. It's basically, falling on the sword is some sort of like self-deprecating comments. You can do it on the phone. You can do it via email. Basically being like, ooh, sorry, I obviously wasn't doing my job good
Yeah.
enough if you're not responding.
Yeah, so that's a great question and great kind of summary. So I do two pieces of fall on your sword within the sequence itself. The second one that or the second to last one that I do is called fall on your sword light, because we're not combining it with what I call the hard walkout principle. In the last breakup email, I'd seen a bunch of different breakup emails that were either blaming you for not responding. It'd be like, hi, Scott, I've reached out 15 times and you just haven't gotten back to me, like, poor me, blah, blah, blah. And it makes your prospect feel guilty and they don't respond. Or I had seen in breakup emails, even worse, of like, can I hear the 5 options of what could be happening? Like, number 1, you're not the right person. Number 2, you don't value data. I just want to update my CRM. Of like, I'm like, okay, people, like, is our CRM data that clean? Of like, I'll come over to look at your system because we must not know some kind of best in practice. And it's like, hygiene of CRM is a huge issue in the industry. So the breakup heavy email, or the fall on your sword heavy email, it goes, and it's the closest to a template that we run here at Chorus, but it says basically, reason for my outreach is I just want to make sure I didn't overstep my bounds. Given your, recent growth of adding 50 sales reps, I thought it was an appropriate time to reach out. Maybe it's me, but I'm getting the feeling now's not just not the best time to connect. Did I get that right? If not, no worries. Perhaps we can connect in the future. So it's like, I'm falling on my sword that, like, I feel like it's just not the best time to connect, and I'm hard walking out the door. The reason that I do some version of that in Fall on Your Sword Light, where I'm taking the accountability of the lackluster outreach, is because I don't want to use my silver bullet yet. The breakup email has a super high response rate. But after that, whatever you tell your prospect, you need to do.
Yeah.
So if I say I'm going to leave you alone, you need to ice the account for a little bit, in my opinion, to have some integrity in the game. So that's why I do a fall on your sword light. It's a version of it paired with the personalized email, but stay tuned because it's one of the flip the script sessions are on in a couple of weeks.
I love it. Yeah. And if you're not familiar, I think it's an old Sandler term. So it's, you can go find other ways to fall on your sword. Really quickly, my favorite one that I've used in the past when I'm heavy cold calling back in the day, don't do as much anymore, was, if someone was going to brush me off and they'd be like, oh, sorry, not interested, I would just quickly say, oh man, I'm really trying to get better at this. Is there anything that I could have done that would have resulted in me getting a meeting with you? I'm really just trying to work on this. And then completely defuses the situation. It's kind of a pattern disruptor. And they'll usually give you some positive feedback, or just say, honestly, I wasn't even listening. What are you selling? And
Totally. And another Sandler one from an AE perspective that I was taught on. So I was Sandler trained for a little. I really like Sandler. A lot of his stuff that he did is a lot of psychology, if you haven't looked him up. But anywho, if someone ghosted you for the first 10 minutes of a meeting, he would implore you to leave. I mean, this is when field sales is the thing, right? This is back in Texas. I'm like riding horses, right? It's like, leave the meeting and then ping them, did I mess something up? I thought based on our last conversation, and it's like, did I mess something up? Like, saves lives. That's what one of my reps said the other day, is, did I mess something up saves lives? Because it gets a response, because it pulls that onus to you.
Yeah. And one more thing, wait, see, this is going to go so much longer. I was meeting with a very enterprise rep. This guy's like, closes hundreds of millions of dollars worth of deals. And he was meeting a very big account, huge clothing retailer recently. Yeah. And he had sent an agenda to their whole executive team before. And he got there and they started plugging in like a laptop, and we're like, okay, let's see the demo. And it was a discovery, like, introductory thing. And he was like, did anyone read the agenda? Everyone's like, no. And he was like, okay, well, we're going to have to reschedule. And he just power moved it and left, and was like, I don't want to waste everyone's time, and left. And like,
that's fair.
It was highly effective. Apparently it's now progressing the way
of course, like, fall on your sword, we could do, I think, a 2-hour segment on it, but literally it's like, we all mess up. We all have, struggle in places. We all, the biggest response that we are getting from our prospect is no response, because we weren't interesting enough or thought-provoking enough
Yeah.
You know, they're not bad people because they're not responding. So it's like, you know, taking accountability for that of like, I've asked reps, like, why didn't that, you know, I saw them going on the phone. I'm like, why didn't that call work out? And they're like, I blacked out and I feature dumped. And I'm like, got it, been there. And I'm like, call them back and tell them that. And they look at me
that's a good one.
cross-eyed. And I'm like, hey, call them back and tell them, being a sales effectiveness platform, we should know better. And that when they, whatever that happened, like, that is a huge part of our strategy of like, you didn't expect them to pick up. They did. You were frazzled. You dropped your Diet Coke or whatever. It's like calling them back and leading with that, not relying on that to book your meeting. Like, people even like, they just sit there and they're like super sad on the phone. It's like, no, you need to marry. It's like balance, balance, balance. I asked a rep the other day, like, hey, Jennifer Aniston, when you see her drinking a beer, do you like that image? And he said, yeah. And I said, why? He was like, because, you know, she's super fit and you wouldn't expect that to like happen. I'm like, right. Our, you know, humans crave balance of like nurturing, but like direct, but polite, nurturing, but strong, like all those things paired together. So I implore them to like lead with, hey, as a pattern interrupt, like, you picked up, I didn't expect it, and tell them the truth. Don't over embellish, but tell them the truth. And then be like, if you give me the next 30 seconds to give you my best dog and pony show on who we are and why I thought we might be a fit, I promise I will stop hammering you with, you know, voicemails if you give me that shot. And they're like, game on. It's like 98% conversion for us. So I'd push anyone on the line to lead with that humility and pair it along with really strong, relevant buyer persona value prop. And it's like the keys to the kingdom.
Love it. Love it. Couldn't agree more. All right, next one. Just a clarifying question. Does day mean business day or literal days? Business day.
Great
correct?
question. Business day. Yes.
Sweet.
Business day.
How do you research your buyers at scale though? And I'm going to add something to that. What are your thoughts on like just a straight like market research dev rep or like a VA that is just getting snippets out of this content?
Yeah, I have heard of them. LDRs for list building, MDRs for, you know, the research, because I think the rule of the game. See, there's a cop. Can you hear that in the background? There's like
always
a cop
coming
going.
for you. There's always some sort of alarm.
Really sorry, people. I steal a lot of stuff. I don't think the research can be outsourced because you are responsible for then developing the hook.
Right.
So, you know, it's like someone, again, can give you data on what's going on in their firm, and that's a great like scenario, but you have to be responsible for hooking that in the value prop. And what makes and breaks reps, or what makes the difference between a C player, a B player, and an A player is how well they can hook that research. So I'll give you a great example of, there was a girl who I did Flip the Script Boston. It was my first live one, not in San Francisco. And this girl shows up and she's like really patiently waiting in this line. So I talked to her and she's like, hi, and I'm going to give her a shout out. Her name's Jacqueline. She's like, hi, my name's Jacqueline. I need to talk to you about something. I'm like, okay, what's up? She said, in your third Flip the Script session in minute 8, you said that you have to be relevant to your buyer persona because they don't have any time. And you said that one of the biggest reasons you didn't have time is that you're doing 4 to 5 interviews per day. What if I could take that, like decrease that 3 hours a day for interviewing to 30 minutes and still give you the same level, quality and quantity of reps that were placed on your team? And I'm like, girlfriend, that was the
Here's my calendar.
I'm like, do you want to work here? I'm like, put it aside. And she showed up in person to do it. But like that hook,
you tried to poach her.
Totally. 100%. 3,000%. And I'm like, hey, the reason it was so useful is like she proved research. That's one step. But then she hooked that to a real pain of mine. And so it's like when it comes to an MDR, number one, I think it would be a pain to just develop that. Like I would have to hear more context. I would think enterprise only, but you're responsible for developing the hook. And so, I would say it's all in-house with an SDR team, at least up to upper mid-market general business. I would suggest that it's all with the SDR team.
Cool. Sounds right to me. All right. We talked about, if they're not on. What stage of your sequence are you seeing the most conversions and like the best activities? Is there a certain one that you're like, that's our moneymaker?
I would say that there's Three real money makers. The initial email for us.
Okay.
They're just shocked. They're shocked that it's personalized messaging. I am literally off record. Again, we're hiring. I am rewarding my reps with gift cards for every single time they get a job offer and they can show it to me.
Really?
Yes.
That's an amazing spiff. I love that one.
So
I did. You got to really stand beside your
Totally.
organization, because hopefully they don't get triple the comp. But yeah, I love that.
It's constant, and I am thinking about, I mean, I hope none of them are watching this. They hear my rants all day, so hopefully not. But I'm thinking about doing a spiff on LinkedIn post promoting their outreach and how good it was. If someone does that organically, you don't ask them to, they organically do it and takes the time to say, this was some of the best outreach I had ever heard. I mean, we're getting it several times per day. And again, I don't think this is a chorus specific thing. I want to stress that. Like, I was at Gong beforehand and it happened all the time there. It's wild. G2, same thing. Chorus come over here. So I think it's, the people in the tech are the most harped on topics, but it's process that's really driving those results. And so I'm, giving them gift cards straight up. If someone asks you to be employed, then you're getting a fat gift card from me on your desk. So it's really fun for them to get that level. And I'm like, hey, you can build your network. And if I ever make you mad enough to where you want to leave me, then like, there's your avenue to do it. So it's just really exciting.
I love it. That's a cool, and it's such a good mentality as a leader to have. Like, you're not there to, you're there to empower and teach people. That's it.
Totally.
And whether they're
get out of the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Very cool. Okay. Last one. This is the last question I think we'll get to. Are you leveraging LinkedIn for more than just research? What about connecting with prospects? Are you peppering in outreach within LinkedIn? Once you're connected, are you doing any messages, comments? What's kind of the strategy there that you're teaching?
That's a great question. I hear a lot of people talk about social selling. I would say I don't do it that much, because I feel like it's and this is just a preference thing. I feel like the original reason for LinkedIn was kind of a resume builder, talk about hot topics without product push all the time. And one of the biggest, I actually did this article with you guys on the 6 scary horror villains not to be on your cold outreach, this October. And one of them was Two-Faced, Two-Face from Batman. It was like, okay, bait and switching your prospects. Hey, I'd love to connect with you to add mutual value to each other's network. It's like, I can see them. I add them. Then they pitch me and then I unadd them. I'm like, I can see it in the message. So I think, especially right up front, if you connect with someone, I think it's not a long tail. It's not a great way to do business and build rapport and add to the relationship. I think what is a good strategy, but there's no way, I mean, maybe there is a way, I just haven't thought about it yet, but like, I just try and connect with all the people who are valuable to me. I do not personalize the LinkedIn request. Yeah. And then if they add me back, I fill my feed with what sales leaders are saying and sales ops and enablement leaders are saying. And then I will organically like stuff and comment on it. But I always say, lead with integrity. If you didn't like the post, don't like the post. Yeah. But if they do say something really valuable, take the time to write a comment, about but no one likes a brown noser. So I would say, like, always do it in an appropriate fashion and call out what you really liked about the post and engage with them there. But I think it's a really, I'm cognizant of the people who like my content or follow my content. I know exactly who they are. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I could give you a list of, my mom and all of her bridge group friends to follow my stuff. So it's like, I think it's a good way to get in front of your buyer, but as far as and start a conversation, but I would say you need to be careful to deplete what Josh Braun calls the commission breath, like have a clean hand and be there to help them and teach them and add value. And you'd be, I didn't do any of this content to monetize it. Yeah, is the truth. I know that's wild, but I wanted to help the SDR community grow. But the backlash of people just flat out messaging me and asking me for a demo is uncanny. So like, even if you don't have that plug, I would suggest people, the companies that I think that will excel are the companies that teach their prospects something ungated without any real ask in it, you know, anything in it for them, and really be aggressive about adding that value to their day and not be so heavy on what's in it for me.
I agree. I totally agree. It's almost like just look at what marketing did a while back when content marketing exploded. It's the exact same premise. We're just doing it at a one-to-one basis now as individuals. Totally. And you got to just lead with a ton, except they gated more stuff. Maybe not so much gating this time. Just lead with value. It's a super long game, and you're creating an inbound engine when you're on LinkedIn. That's the 100%. Only way it works. They're coming to you. That's it.
100%.
Cool. Last question. I saw one, which I'm actually just curious about. Are you using video in any of your emails or your reps?
I would again want to know the discovery as to why. We are not. Okay. We have thought about it. This is again a personal preference thing. It doesn't mean I don't think it can be done well, and it's a super high personalized, you know, one-to-one in a lot of scenarios. Yeah. What I don't love about, man, I'm going to get railed out for this later, but I'm going to do it. You know, can't keep this in a box. I think it placates my reps. And I really don't like that of like, hi, my name is Beck and here's my Labrador and, you know, whatever. And like, will you give me some time? And I want to empower them, that they should be in those meetings because they, you know, they did their research and they earned it. Right. And so I'm not very big on the splash, and like, instead of answering the question of what channel, it's like, it doesn't matter if it's, you know, necessarily, if it's a courier pigeon or event, or that you're meeting someone, or voicemail, or like, you know, whatever, cold call, email, LinkedIn, it's about your messaging, in my opinion. So I don't personally leverage video. It doesn't mean I think it can't be done. Doesn't mean I think it can't be done well. Mm-hmm. But I don't like the feel of it, of my reps sitting there and kind of monkey dance for my prospects too much.
Makes total sense. Makes sense. Okay, people are really listening to everything you're saying because we got a clarifying question. This is from John. Beck mentioned there are 3 areas of her sequence that she gets the most responses. She said first email, and she never mentioned the other 2.
Oh, I'm so sorry, John. I'm so sorry. Like, you should talk to the guy who does the filming for Flip the Script. He would say the same thing. That my titles are too long. That email gets a very high response. I mean, it's hard because they all get a very healthy response rate, but second to last email, the Fall on the Sword Light and breakup email gets and it's almost entirely template. It gets an unruly response rate and opens up a lot of conversation. So if I had to rank them, I would say number 1 is the first email. Second is a Fall on Your Sword Light email, which is number 4. Number 5 is the breakup email. They're probably tied. The second email, the Agoji sequence email with the any thoughts, and then add content, every step of the funnel. Even in the breakup email, we say like, maybe it's just me, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, at the end, we still add content. Like, even though you don't like me, you're not respond, like, you know, of like, all dependent on the words. But I would rank email 1. You know, you can go back to that slide later, but email 1, email 4, where you're replying and falling on your sword about the, you know, the relevance of your content. Breakup email, 3rd or 4th would be the second email for the Agoji. And then the last one would be the 3rd email, which is personalized. It's your second fully personalized email.
I love it. And quickly reiterating, so the breakup email, the onus is on the rep, right? You're not saying, hey, why are you ignoring me? Because I strongly dislike those now.
No,
when I get them, I'm just like, I don't, go away.
It's like, why are you making me feel guilty? So the exact text, I believe, will be releasing in 2 weeks. Cool. But it's basically, you know, hi, just want to make sure I didn't overstep my bounds, given your competition with, you know, whatever, in your case, Sales Loft. I thought you might like the attached content on selling against the competition. Maybe it's me. I'm getting the feeling it's just not the best time to connect. Did I get that right? If not, no worries. Perhaps we can connect in the future. So it's it's like, this is me. I originally thought it was, you know, I just want to make sure I didn't overstep here. That's the biggest line. And the title of it, you're gonna laugh, is Swan Song.
Swan song. I
It's like
like
I'm
it.
dying, and this is the last thing that I got. So
Love it.
yeah, so email 1452 and then 3 is on response rates, trigger rates.
I love it. All right. Well, we only went half an hour over.
We
Beck,
nailed it.
thank you so much. It's always fun chatting with you. And everyone who hung out with us, it's insane how many people actually stayed. So if it was your lunch break or afternoon if you're East Coast, thank you so much. We do appreciate it. You guys were such a great audience. There was a billion questions. And Beck, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
The best way to get in touch with me is if you go to my LinkedIn. I'm Becc Holland on LinkedIn. Add me there. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. This is brand new content, so I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on the webinar today, but you can add me there. And if you want to hear more about topics like the ones that I mentioned during the session, if you go to chorus.ai on LinkedIn, I'm not making a product plug here, but we are doing every single week, I'm talking about a different topic under a series called Flip the Script, which is basically just me trying to get, this content out and, help some prospecting teams, SDR teams, and push the needle forward on the industry. So it's called Flip the Script. It's on chorus.ai on LinkedIn. So we splice out a video every single Thursday. Yeah. So that's the best way.
I love it. And the feedback that is coming through is ridiculously positive. So
that's great to hear.
You nailed it. All right, Beck. Well, I'm sure we'll talk very soon, but thanks again.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.